Hi everybody, and welcome to Matrix Live Season 3, Episode 6. It's us again.
We're back.
Sorry.
Temporarily.
Who knows? I apologise in advance that I have a horrible cold and I'm feeling completely dead.
It's going to be fine, don't worry.
That was your cue to say it, and I'm also feeling knackered. So this is basically going to be low energy, generally dead Matrix Live. It was meant to be me and Eric enthusing about some fun stuff, but he's also dead. And then it got late, and then he went home. So I'm afraid that
So you get me instead of Eric.
Yeah.
Be happy.
For old time's sake.
Tell us about the foundation, Matthew.
Yeah, we had a lot of meetings about foundation with the folks who have the unenviable task of turning the MSC 1318 into proper articles of association of the foundation. And we've been going through it lots and lots, and basically finished it all, at least to the point that we can update the MSC. However, then had to go to the US on a dramatic trip, which killed about 10 days and apparently has killed me since. So we haven't finished writing it up. But heads up that there is lots of interesting updates there, which will eventually land when I manage to contact switch to it sometime real soon now.
We also did the application for the community of interest, like the CIC.
Community Interest Company.
Yes, but the sentence was becoming weird. That's why I stopped. So we did the application to be a community interest company.
Yep.
That's the right way to put it. So it's ongoing, fingers crossed.
So this is like a bit like charitable status, but isn't actually charitable status, but instead means that some independent body look over to ensure that the foundation itself is non-profit and acts for the best interest of all concerned, blah, blah, blah. So that should hopefully land in the next couple of weeks. Might get a bit delayed by Christmas, and hopefully that will align with the MSc 1318 write-up, having the new articles, bringing on the additional guardians to complement myself and Amandine as looking after the foundation and ensuring that from a legal perspective it sits on the right track, and then we're good.
Almost there.
Indeed. Tell us about CHAP, Amandine. What's CHAP? I'm not familiar with this term.
I'm not even sure we can say the term.
He did.
Say it?
Yeah.
Okay. So he is Mounir Majoubi, who is the Secretary of State for Digital for France, who announced officially yesterday at the Paris Open Source Summit that CHAP, the internal messaging app for all the French government, was going live into production.
Woohoo!
So yeah, deployment is ongoing, and our friend Michael here is working hard with the French and doing endless workshops, deploying with them in parallel all the different servers. Live.
Slightly worried that you looked over your shoulder at Patricia and Sir Arthur David at that point.
Didn't work. So yeah, exciting times. We're getting there, and it's going really well. And we're happy.
So for context, CHAP is basically a new Matrix client written on top of Matrix, Android SDK and React SDK and iOS SDK that we've been helping the French government with for their own purposes. And it launched as trial back in July.
Yeah.
And that was across, I think, 14 ministries. And at the same time, they've been doing an audit of the work that needs to go into it, specifically from an ops perspective, and that was sufficiently successful that they're now pushing it out to all and sundry. So the world's biggest Matrix deployment that we're aware of, at least so far, is up and happening, and the target is to reach 5.5 million users because 10% of France works for the government.
Oops. So yeah, this is exciting news. The guys were out downtown yesterday, so that was Neil, Brendan, and
Halfshot. Oops, it crashed.
It crashed. So we were saying there was a really decentralized meetup in London last night, and the team went, and apparently it was exciting. lots of speed dating with people on site to explain what Matrix is. And yeah, so lots of fun.
And interestingly, folks either currently at the UK government or previously at the UK government on the digital side of things were there on force. And so we're hopeful, cross fingers, that we can get the local folk to play with Matrix there, much as their French compatriots have.
Yeah.
Compatriot? Counterpatriot?
Yeah, compatriot in the same country.
Well,
So-
yeah, precisely. It's like we want counterpatriot, but then that sounds like somebody who isn't patriotic.
Friend.
Yes.
Equivalent?
Entente cordiale.
Entente cordiale. Right, let's move to other stuff which has happened. What do we get? We got releases, well, at least release candidates for Synapse.
34, only about 4 months in coming, which includes full, proper Python 3 across the entire board, as I'm sure you heard Amber enthuse about with Neil last week, and if you didn't, then go and view last week's video, because it's probably much better than this one. And that was release candidate yesterday, as was also Riot 17.8 on the web, which I don't think has anything massively vital on it. Possibly hidden super secret .well-known support is the main exciting thing there, I think. Either way, they're both an release candidate. If you're feeling brave, give them a go on riot.am/staging or Synapse on 34.
But basically, there isn't much to say because we got a bit distracted by customer work to pay the bill.
Yeah, so on the new Vector side of things, where we do the occasional gig to try to pay the salaries and make sure that we have, well, we can support ourselves working on Matrix, we've had a fairly massive distraction over the last couple of weeks. We can't say who it's for, but what we can do is talk about some of the more exciting stuff that it is bringing to light in the nearest future.
Benefiting everyone into the Matrix ecosystem.
Yeah, so basically everything that we've done for it is eventually going to end up being released one way or another as open source. A lot of it already is, to be honest, albeit on slightly weird branches that haven't merged into the mainstream on Riot and Synapse, etc. The sort of things we've been looking at is on the Riot redesign having tiled support. So the ability to have lots of different rooms up at the same time in different configurations, potentially also mixing rooms with widgets and generally having a freeform tiled UI on the app, which turns out to be awesome. It does look slightly as if somebody's taken a lot of Riot iOSs and like stuck them next to one another on your computer screen, which would probably have been a quicker way of implementing it. But as a kind of proof of concept, it's really, really fun to see it work. So thanks to Bruno for a mission to get that together.
Jump to date.
Yeah,
as well.
We've been after it for what, 4 years now?
Yeah.
To say what was happening on September.
I received this document. I remember it was around this time, and I have to go and scroll back.
Yeah. So at long last, the ability to avoid having to search for random terms, hoping that you might find results in the right time frame, or hit the page up button until your computer goes bang or Synapse goes bang, or write some Postgres to look in the database to work it out manually. We now have an API which is completely off spec, but will get MSC'd and merged properly, which allows you to jump to write date on rooms. I think it's even secretly live on matrix.org right now, but I can't even remember what the endpoint's called, and I think it might also need an index to work properly. But it's coming, you'll soon know.
Yeah. What else? There is work on low bandwidth.
Yeah, so this was one of the big things which we were digging into, and honestly there is months of stuff that we could say about this now, and in fact I ended up submitting a FOSDEM real-time comms dev room talk to hopefully have an opportunity to give a lecture on everything we've done here. But we went on a mission to get low bandwidth transports working, at least to see how low we could go. And the target given was 100 bits a second. Yes, that is 100 of your Earth bits a second, which, if that means nothing to you, bear in mind that your sort of dial-up modems tended to be 56K, in practice 40K, and then possibly 33.6 or 28.8. And if you're starting to get really old, you might have played around with a 2400 bits per second modem, or if you're really old, you might know what an acoustic coupler is, and those guys tended to run at about 300 bits a second, and we're talking a third less than that at 100 bits a second. Another way of thinking of that is that if you send an Ethernet packet, a typical Ethernet MTU of 1514 bytes at 100 bits a second, I think that works out at taking about, in fact, I'm going to get the maths wrong, let me just work it out quickly. So that's 12,000 bits, which at 100 bits a second sounds suspiciously like 120 seconds or 2 minutes to send an Ethernet packet over a link at that speed. And honestly, this is we can't open source that stuff yet, irritatingly, mainly because it makes some very, very dirty assumptions about being on a very, very fragile closed network rather than the open matrix one. But we got it. We hit our 100 bits a second target and ended up with squidging matrix payloads both for client-server API and server-server API down to well, it worked out as about 30 or 40 bytes, if that, of payload, which when you add in the other headers works out at about 90 bytes, which works out as like 5-6 seconds to send at that kind of frequency. And so as long as you don't have messages turning out more rapidly than every 6 seconds, it works pretty well. So the whole thing was a massive hack and an experiment to see just how much we could squidge things together. And honestly, we'll provide the details and open source it as soon as we can. But just wanted to give some explanation as to why we've been a little bit darker than normal. Even more interesting, perhaps, than the low bandwidth transport stuff has also been that if you are on a federated network, which is operating under those kind of low bandwidth conditions, the current routing algorithm in Matrix is a disaster. Because imagine if you were sending out a tiny message to a big room with every server in it, and you had like 100 servers in the room, then suddenly that single message ends up being 100 times bigger than it should have been, because your server will have to fan out to talk to all 100 servers in turn. Not fan out, the opposite, full mesh.
Full mesh, yeah.
So what we've done there was to also investigate using smarter routing algorithms, which is something that we've been promising since day one. And we finally got to play with it a little bit and ended up with this fan-out style algorithm where your server goes and talks to the nearest servers in the room that it has the best connection to, depending on how much uplink it has. That could be 1 or 2 or 4 or all of them, but the assumption is that you're on a terrible connection and you only need to talk to a few of them. And then that in turn fans out and fans out and fans out, trying to do some funky stuff to avoid doubling up, hitting the same servers from multiple directions, but critically without needing to know the full topology of the network or have a kind of God's view of the world. And it works, and it's really cool. However, it completely assumes that the network is 100% trusted, so it is not Byzantine fault tolerant. If you have a bad server, which you pick and ask it to fan out the traffic, for now at least, you're trusting it to do its job, and if something goes wrong, you're screwed. So it's not even something we can use in the real world, let alone a private deployment. Again, it was more a tech proof of concept to check whether this is possible, and it is. So basically, massive distraction for a couple of weeks to go and put all of that together and get it up and running, but we will try to share it with the wider world as soon as we possibly can, and then get MSCing it and pulling it into the mainstream matrix.
Yeah, it's fun. Sorry, my English is
En français peut-être?
En français. Il y a eu des améliorations. There has been some enhancements on the widget API as well, where now they're able to pick up any arbitrary events, which is going to be quite useful. It's not fully out there. I think Rick was saying you need to adapt, fix some bits in Riot before deploying it on develop, but yeah, it's it's almost terrible.
Yeah, it's potentially super cool in terms of allowing you to start building totally custom UI on top of totally custom events within a Matrix client. And it could open the way to things like polls and just richer stuff in general. And finally, Travis went off on one for this to prove out the idea of account merging in a very pragmatic, practical way, where you end up just taking the existing accounts which you have on disparate home servers and presenting them as a single logical user in the user interface of the app. So if we had a DM between myself and Amdine, and there were 3 different Amdines on different servers, and just me, from my perspective and her perspective, there would still only be 2 people in the room. So this is a bit of a hack relative to the Holy Grail approach that we have planned for switching identifiers from DNS to cryptographic ones, but for the purposes of a quick demo to show that multi-homed accounts are plausible on Matrix, it actually worked pretty well. So that you synchronize the accounts to basically join and part and be invited at the same time. And if one of those servers goes bang, you can log into another one and off you go, participating as the same identity but using the different server. And it also prototypes the concept of rooms as profiles or profiles as rooms, because we needed a way to publish which accounts are part of your primary account, and that effectively is an extensible profile problem. So out of this, we got to actually experiment at last with extensible profiles, using them as a room, and it worked cautiously well. Now we need to play a bit more with it and MSC it up and experiment some more, but suffice it to say there should be some really, really fun stuff coming out of there. And if we finally have extensible profiles, then that becomes super exciting for next generation stuff. So long story short, we got horribly distracted from the Arnold work that we should be working on full time. Honestly, this is worth it, I think, in terms of pushing the wider ecosystem forwards, and there will be a ton of work that comes off the back of it. But right now, we're refocusing on getting everything to a 1.0 rather than getting distracted by these post 1.0 things. But wanted to give everyone some visibility as to what was going on and to apologise for being a bit distracted.
Yeah, because it's fun. So it's good to see things coming up, even if it's not ready yet and will come up only in a few months. It's still super cool.
Yeah. And frankly, it also acts as a motivation to get the 1.0 stuff done so that we can
Good
properly
backstory.
focusing on this. I mean, it's also tempting to open up both battlefronts properly now, but honestly, we're closing Pandora's box and getting back to the BAU as of this week. Talking of which, the business as usual on Riot Web on the redesign is looking great. Bruno is fixing read markers at last, so for all the people who wonder what on earth is going on with their jump to unread messages bar at the top of the screen that never works, we're finally fixing it as part of the redesign. And there was some
I was
other...
meant to review that. I haven't done it.
Yeah, he was asking me for stuff on it too.
I need to check.
Bad people. What was the other fun thing? Oh, custom presents. Oh, again, is also randomly getting some attention. So the ability to set your an away message, I guess, or a status message, a bit like model after MSN and Skype for Business and Office Communicator and Link and all the other things that horrible products been called over the years, to allow you to say, I am currently in the loo, or on holiday, or well, incoherently tired, or whatever your status might happen to be. So that should be coming fairly soon, probably next week.
Yeah. So there should have been iOS and Android releases this week. So given they didn't come out, there should be next week probably with a bunch of bug fixes.
Yep.
So,
oh, and we have Valère on the French side.
We do have Valère who joined us for Android support on the maintenance, while François is blitzing the reboot, as we call it, and Benoit helps him as well as...
François calls it Riot X, which I think is a brilliant name. A bit like Telegram had Telegram X.
Yeah, that's a bit of
and Apple had Mac OS X and iPhone X's and things. I think X is a perfectly reasonable code name, at least. If a Riot X is coming, you heard it here first.
Yeah. So yeah, more manpower on Android, and he's been especially working on fixing push notifications this week. It's not completely finished, but should be, probably around. Maybe they managed to put it on the release. I don't know. I need to check.
Cool. we should probably stop waffling.
Yeah.
Have an amazing weekend, everybody. Get more sleep than we have, and speak to you soon.
Speak soon. Bye bye.
Bye.